everyone, VM Service here. For those who's new to the channel, I have been a top slate Spire 1 player grinding for Ascension 20 hard kills for many years. Today I will be breaking down strategies to consistently beat max Ascensions on the Regent. Note that these strategies will certainly work on lower Ascensions as well. However, you are allowed way more freedom since the enemies are less punishing. This video will be broken up into 5 parts. 1. General discussion on Regent and his game plan. 2. The star generation and payoff cards. 3. The Forge package. 4. The card generation package. 5. The essential support cards that doesn't quite fit into any of the above categories. Now let's get right into it. Part 1. The Regent's core game plan. The Regent introduces stars as an alternate casting cost alongside energy. Your starter deck already contains a star generation card, Venerate, and a payoff, Falling Star. For a starter card, Falling Star is already very potent. Applying debuffs to the enemy and dealing 7 damage for 0 energy is insane value. And you can play it on turn 1 immediately due to the starter relic giving you 3 stars for free. However, you will quickly realize this makes the Regent extremely draw order dependent. The vulnerable Falling Star applies is wasted if you don't draw another attack with it on the same turn. And you need to draw star generation before the payoffs to actually play the payoff cards. This makes it harder to build a Regent deck that simply outvalues the enemies with a pile of good stuff and makes a more combo-oriented approach much stronger. You want to generate stars, then play your powerful star payoffs over and over again. This has 2 deck building implications. First, every card you pick needs to solve an immediate problem, generate stars, or spend stars with a powerful effect. Second, card draw and deck manipulation comes at a premium to help line up your star cards. In the next sections, I will break down every card on this character to make the strategy work. Part 2. Star generation and payoffs. These are the cards that either generate stars or spend them for a powerful effect. First off, we have Glow. 1 energy, gain 1 star, draw 2 cards. Now on the surface, this card is already quite efficient for only 1 energy. But the 2 effects stapled onto the same card just does everything that Regent wants. It is card draw and star gain at the same time. You are able to gain stars and draw into your star payoffs to immediately cast them. And since the star payoff cards are usually very cheap, 0 cost or 1 cost, spending the 1 energy on Glow doesn't feel bad at all. And it upgrades to gaining 2 stars to draw 2 cards, which can enable some pretty degenerate infinite combos with a card that could potentially use stars to gain energy. They can loop them over and over again. Overall, insane card. One of the best star generation options you have on this class. Next up, we have Royal Gamble. 0 energy, 5 stars to gain 9 stars. And it exhausts. So this card just does one thing, but it does the one thing very well. It just makes you a shit ton of stars, which is something the Regent is very interested in. I would say this card is a little bit awkward to play early game if you cannot reach the 5 stars, since you will probably be spending some of your stars on your starter card Falling Star to deal with the early portion of the game. However, as soon as you can play Royal Gamble once, you pretty much just solve the star problem for the entire fight. And it upgrades to Retain, so if you draw this before you can pay for it, you can just hold it into your hand and play it in a later turn. Very solid star generation card, but a little bit more conditional than Glow, so I will put it in A tier. Genesis. At the start of your turn, gain 2 star for 2 energy. This is just a very brute force star generation. You just get stars every turn, which is a very good effect to have since all your star cards are generally pretty cheap, so you can usually afford to spend the 2 energy to put it into play. You put Genesis into play in a long fight, then the fight is pretty much over. So very good power. I will put it in A tier as well. Hidden Cash. 1 energy, gain a star, then next turn gain 3 stars. This card just gains 4 stars. That's pretty much all it does. But 4 stars for 1 energy is much more efficient than 2 stars for 1 energy, for example, in your starter card, Venerate. So usually you're pretty much happy to pick up a Hidden Cash if you have any star payoff cards in your deck. I'll put it in A tier as well, but note that you do not want to pick too many star generation cards all at once. So for example, if you already have Royal Gamble, maybe you don't want to pick up a Hidden Cash, otherwise you will just make a bunch of stars and have no way to spend them. But individually, all the star generation cards are quite good. Gathering Light. Gain 7 block and gain a star. For a common card, this card is completely insane. It saves you chip damage in the early game and it doesn't completely fall off since you will be gaining the star. It's kind of like the bread and butter card for this class, really. So again, we'll put it into A tier. Shining Strike. This is an attack that deals 8 damage and gains 2 stars. However, there's another effect that's pretty interesting on this card. Put this card on top top of your draw pile. Essentially, it means you can play Shining Strike every turn if you decide to play it one time. This could be good or bad. It is good because if you would like that effect to generate 2 stars every turn, you can just play this card over and over. However, if you don't want to draw Shining Strike anymore, it will go on top of your draw pile, so essentially you're drawing 1 fewer card for the next turn. Now for the early game, this is fine. 1 energy deal 8 is not the best, but gaining 2 star on top of that is decent value. So you can pick this card in the early portion of Act 1. However, later down the line, there are better things to do than playing Shining Strike every turn. Overall, just kind of fine. I'll put it in B tier. Solar Strike, a common attack, deal 8 damage, gain 1 star for 1 energy. Now this card is pretty similar to Shining Strike. However, it does not shuffle on top of your draw pile, and the upgrade makes it gain an additional star. So it's a very efficient upgrade and a very efficient common attack. Usually very happy to pick this up early game. But again, you don't want to oversaturate your deck with too many star generations. If you do, then you will have like nothing to spend the stars on. Just in a vacuum, still a very good card. I'll put it in A tier. Knockout Blow, 3 energy for a 30 damage attack. And if this kills an enemy, it generates 5 stars. This card is kind of similar to Sunder on the defect. If you kill an enemy with a big 3-cost attack, you get energy refunded. But in this case, you get stars refunded. Quite solid early because it just has a big number. But usually in the late game, you're not really able to kill an enemy with it, so it falls off quite hard. But again, you can pick this up early and it's like fine, since getting 5 stars is quite a lot of stars. I'll put it in B. Alignment, 0 energy, 2 stars to gain 2 energy, upgrades to gain 3 energy. This is one of the infinite enablers on this class, spending 0 energy to gain energy and it doesn't exhaust. So for example, if you can loop Alignment and Glow, you could create some sort of infinite combo. Early game, this is extremely difficult to pick because you don't want to spend your stars on gaining 2 energy when you don't even have anything to spend the energy on. You would rather spend the stars on something a bit more powerful, like debuffing the enemy or dealing a bunch of damage. So early game, very bad. However, late game, it could just enable you to go infinite. So that's something to look out for. I'll put it in C because it's highly situational. But if it's in the correct situation, it goes up to S. Astral Pulse, 0 energy, 3 stars for 14 AoE damage. Now the 14 AoE damage is like very large amount of AoE damage. You can deal with most AoE fights in the game pretty competently. So this is one of the pretty good star payoffs. I will put it in A tier. Black Hole, 1 energy. Whenever you spend or gain star, deal 3 damage to all enemies. Note that this is for an instance of star gain. So if you gain 5 stars all at once, you only do 3 damage to all enemies. Now this card effectively turns every star generator or star spending card deal additional AoE damage, which is decent value if you really need that AoE. It's a decent early game pickup if you don't have anything else to do. However, if you have the AoE damage already covered, you really should not be picking something like Black Hole since it just slows your deck down. But AoE is pretty good in Slay the Spire 2 compared to Slay the Spire. Every act has some very difficult AoE fights. So you can pick the Black Hole card early to cover for the AoE fights, but if you don't need it, you really should not be adding this to your deck. Put it in B tier since it's just a decent value card. Child of Stars, 1 energy power. Whenever you spend star, gain 2 block for each star spent. So for example, if you spend 5 stars on Royal Gamble, you're going to be blocking for 10. This card is completely busted broken. One of the strongest cards on the character. If you remember Mental Fortress from Slay the Spire 1 on the Watcher, this is basically Mental Fortress for this class. Just absurd amount of block for 1 energy. It will go to the top of S tier. Convergence, next turn gain star and energy. Retain your hand this turn. This card is extremely strong. Maybe on the surface, it doesn't read that strong because it's 1 energy, do nothing right now. However, we already discussed that Regent has a very massive draw order dependence, and this retaining your hand for the turn effect fixes a lot of that draw order problem. In addition, you're gaining an extra energy next turn after you have retained your hand, so you have more energy to spend on more cards in hand the next turn. One of the best cards on the character, even though it doesn't read that way. Also an S tier card. Crescent Spear, 1 energy, 1 star, common attack. Deal 6 damage, deal 2 additional damage to all your cards that have star cost. That includes itself. So in the starter deck, you have Crescent Spire plus Falling Star. 10 damage for a baseline that costs star and energy is really not great. And if you're adding a bunch of star cards into your deck, that makes Crescent Spire stronger. There are just better things to do to make better use of the stars. So if your deck is already good, Crescent Spire becomes larger. But if your deck is already good, you don't want an effect like dealing some damage for energy. Overall, quite bad. Might be one of the worst star payoffs. I'll put it into D tier. Dying Star, 1 energy, 3 stars. Ethereal, so if you don't play it, you lose it. Deal 9 damage to all enemies, and all enemies lose 9 strength this turn. This effect is completely ridiculous in this game. There are a lot of enemies that hit you with multi-hit attacks, so the 9 strength could potentially block for like 27. Also, if you're in an AoE situation, every enemy is losing 9 strength. One of the best star payoffs, that would be going straight into S tier. Devastate, 1 energy, 4 stars for 30 damage. Very simple card, very large number. So if you're able to play Devastate, it's extremely strong. The 4-star cost means you cannot play it on turn 1 if you don't generate more stars, since you gain 3 stars on turn 1. So you should be a little bit careful when picking Devastate, but since the number is so large, it's not that bad. We go into A tier. Decisions, 0 energy, 6 stars. So very steep star cost. Draw 3 cards, choose a skill in your hand and play it 3 times. Upgrades to draw 5. So the upgrade is quite relevant. It lets you select potentially a better skill to play. This card effectively says if you can play it, the combat is over. Very, very powerful effect. However, it's very difficult to gain 6 stars, especially in the early portion of the game. So this might not be something you will want to pick up at the end of Act 1, for example, since playing this card in Act 2 is quite challenging. But later in the game, you can play this card, you just win on the spot. I put it in B tier since it's quite difficult to pick it early. But for later, this card is just completely broken. You like go up to S tier if you can actually play it consistently. Comet, 0 energy, 5 stars. Deal 33 damage. Apply 3 weak, 3 vulnerable. This card is also one of the best star payoffs on the entire character. The 5-star cost hits a pretty notable threshold because you hit 3 stars for free on turn 1, and you play 1 Venerate is already 5-star. So compared to 6-star, this is significantly easier to cast in Act 2. I mean, the effect on the card is completely broken. 33 damage, 3 weak, 3 vulnerable. It's completely shut down enemy and allow you to play other damage card with the vulnerable applied. Very strong card. Be going into S tier. Gamma Blast. This is like the little brother of Comet. Pretty much the same effect for a cheaper star cost. Very strong Act 1 pickup since you can play it on turn 1. And the effect is basically uppercut plus. 13 damage, 2 weak, 2 vulnerable. Very powerful effect. It will also go into S tier alongside of Comet. Guiding Star. 1 energy, 2 star. Deal 12 damage, draw 2 cards. Deal 12 damage, draw 2 cards for 1 energy is a very overloaded effect for a common attack. So the effect is very, very strong. And usually spending 2 stars on this is not super difficult to do. Very strong early game card. And it doesn't fall off late game since the draw 2 is relevant to help you line up your combo. I'll be putting it in A tier. Now with all of these star payoff cards, you want to be careful to not overpick them if you don't have the generation to support them. Because you can get into a situation where you pick a bunch of cards that cost star, you don't make enough stars, then you cannot play half of your deck. And that's obviously really bad. So for example, maybe you do not want to pick like 3 copies of Guiding Star since you cannot play them reliably. So maybe even some of those cards are in A tier and S tier. There are going to be situations you cannot really pick them because your deck just doesn't make enough stars. Neutron Aegis, 1 energy, 5 star for 8 plating. Now plating essentially says you gain 8 block this turn, then 7 block next turn, then 6 block the turn after until it takes down to 0. Just a pretty decent defensive option. The 5-star cost is quite steep, but this card does generate a pretty big amount of block. So I would say it's not too bad. If you can support playing this card for 5 stars, it's not a bad thing to have in the deck. A little bit excessive if you have other better defensive options, but if you don't have anything, this is like fine. So it'll be going to B tier. Particle Wall, gain 9 block, return this card to your hand for the 0 energy and 2 stars. This card basically says now you can pick every star generator because you can always dump stars into Particle Wall. And when you do that, you gain infinite block for the turn. Very, very powerful effect. In addition, if you are able to make Particle Wall free, for example, there's a potion to make any card you play free for the combat, and that also discounts the star cost. That makes this card 0 energy, 0 star, block infinite. Extremely strong defensive option on the character. I will be putting it in S tier. Cloak of Stars, 0 energy, 1 star, block for 7. Just a solid common block card. Spending 1 star for 7 block, it's like fine. If you need to save some chip damage, this is decent for early game. Later down the line, maybe you have something better to do, so you're probably not interested in picking this late game. But as an early game pick, quite good. I'll be putting it in B tier. Reflect. 1 energy, 3 star for 17 block. That by itself is already an insane amount of block. And it also reads blocked attack damage is reflected to your attacker this turn. So if you can play Reflect and another block card, you block for like 30, and the enemy is hitting you for 30, they just take 30 damage. Crazy value for this card. Just for the 17 block alone is already very good. And the reflecting damage part, just cherry on the top. One of the best block cards on the class. It will also be going to S tier. Radiate. 0 energy, 3 damage to all enemies for each star gained this turn. Upgrades to 5 damage. It's a pretty relevant upgrade since it's a multi-hit attack. And if you have any strength scaling, any enchantment to make the damage larger, the skills up even higher. This is a very powerful star payoff card, since on turn 1 you already gain 3 stars. If you draw Radiate on turn 1, you can already play 0 energy 9 AoE, which is like fine value. And if you can generate any star in your deck, Radiate just goes completely crazy. It's not uncommon to have Radiate deal like 16 instances of damage on 1 turn. Very good damage card. However, it does require some setup for your deck, so maybe not the easiest thing to pick early. So it doesn't quite go into S tier, but putting it in A tier. Stardust, an X cost star card. So you are able to spend every star you have on damage for 0 energy, so you can do something else on the same turn. And dealing 5 damage per star is a pretty good way to spend your stars if you have nothing better to do. This also says every star generating card you can pretty much just pick, and you can dump your star into Stardust. Quite a solid star payoff. Pretty comparable to Radiate. The difference is Stardust is more consistent since you don't need to generate the star on the same turn, but Radiate is AoE instead of single damage. Pretty comparable power level to Radiate. I will be putting it in A tier as well. Resonance, 1 energy, 3 stars to gain a strength, and all enemy lose 1 strength. This card just doesn't do enough. Gaining 1 strength is not that much, and all enemy loses 1 strength. It's not super relevant unless you're fighting something like the EOs in Act 1 that hits you for like 1 times 3. Just a little bit too slow for a scaling card when there are better options to spend your stars on. For example, you can spend 3 stars on a Gamma Blast, which deals 13 immediately and applies 2 weak and 2 vulnerable. So this card isn't super great. Of course, if you're able to loop this card, play it over and over again, then you gain like 10 strength, and every enemy loses 10 strength permanently. Is very strong. So if you can build a deck that does that, it's good. But building a deck that does that usually means you're winning the run with like multiple things that can be looped. So overall, kind of like alignment, you need a specific deck for it, but if you can make that deck work, it's very good. And finally, you have 7 stars, a very flavorful card. 2 energy, 7 stars, deal 7 damage to all enemies 7 times. Now the effect is obviously insane. 49 AoE, even for 2 energy, is still above rate by quite a bit. However, 7 stars just like such steep cost. This card is kind of like impossible to play unless you already have plenty of star generation. So as a speculative pick, it's really not great. If you can make this card free, then obviously it's insane. But just on the surface, difficult to play. So I'll be putting it into B tier. Very powerful effect, but a bit hard to set up. That is all for the star generation and payoffs. If you have noticed, most of these cards are quite strong. So if you're able to pick up some of the strong star payoffs, you should be doing that in your run. Part 3. The Forge package. Now, Forge is a keyword that puts the Sovereign Blade into your hand, a 2 energy deal 10 damage retain attack, and makes it scale up throughout the combat. Note that after the Sovereign Blade is created, additional Forges will only increase its attack value, but not put the card into your hand. What Forge effectively does is give you some scaling damage for longer fights, and sometimes you just kind of need that scaling damage to beat a boss, for example. First up, we have Beat into Shape. Deal 5 damage, Forge 5 for 1 energy. Forges for an additional 5 for every other time you've hit the enemy this turn. This card is very draw order dependent, so you need to draw a lot of attacks on the same turn, or draw a multi-hit attack on the same turn as Beat into Shape. Then you're going to need to have enough energy to play those attacks, and then play Beat into Shape. After that, you have a 2-cost Sovereign Blade in your hand, which you might not even able to play on the same turn. So it's very slow scaling, very draw order dependent. Overall, for a rare card, it's not super impressive. impressive. Of course, if you're able to play, for example, Radiate, hit enemy for 20 times, then Beat into Shape can pop off. But if you can already play Radiate to hit the enemy for 20 times, you probably don't need a Beat into Shape to actually win the combat. So overall, a pretty suspicious scaling card that doesn't do much for rare. I'll be putting it into C tier because there are certain situations where you can probably make this card pop off, but usually it's not that great. Bulwark, 2 energy, block 13, forge 10. This card is one of the better forge cards since it also gains you 13 block and the Regent doesn't really have that many good defensive options. So Bulwark is saving you a lot of HP by blocking and getting a little bit of scaling value on the Sovereign Blade. Just a very, very solid value card. One of the better forge options. I will be putting it into A tier. Conqueror, 1 energy, forge 3. And the Sovereign Blade deals double damage to the enemy this turn. This card on the surface might seem it's difficult to line up, but remember Sovereign Blade does retain. So usually the turn you play Conqueror, you can't actually utilize the double damage portion of this card. So as a damage card, it's like fine. It has decent amount of value. And if you're making Sovereign Blade one of your main damage options, now Conqueror is probably something you're interested in picking up. But I would not pick Conqueror by itself. If you do not need to forge, Conqueror is not something you should be picking. I'll be putting into B tier since the value on this card is like fine. Furnace, 1 energy at the start of your turn, forge 4. Now Furnace in long fights is just like fine. Consistent damage scaling is not that bad. Otherwise it's a bit slow, so if you don't need slow damage scaling, don't pick it. You'll be going to B tier. Parry, 1 energy whenever you play Sovereign Blade, gains 6 block. This card is just kind of depressing. 6 block per deck cycle, maybe 12 block for deck cycle for 1 energy, just really isn't that much. There are going to be way better options for blocking than parry. I guess if you're like super desperate for block, you can maybe pick parry if you're already making Sovereign Blades. I will never pick parry just like by itself if you already have other defensive options. I'll be putting it into D tier. Refined Blade, 1 energy, forge 6. Next turn, gain energy. Unfortunately, forge 6 is just a little bit too small. So just as like a first pickup into forge, you're really not interested in Refined Blade. That number just doesn't do enough. And next turn, gain energy is like fine. You are already spending 1 energy on this, so it doesn't actually gain you much energy. Overall, a very mediocre card. Just doesn't do much. It will be going into D tier. Seeking Edge, forge 7. Sovereign Blade now deals AoE damage for 1 energy. So it's a power, but the turn you play it actually does something. Forge is 7. And AoE is at quite a premium in Slay the Spire too. So making your Sovereign Blade do AoE damage is something pretty nice to do. Unfortunately, it's a little bit low impact. Forge 7 is not like the largest number ever. Therefore, it'll be going to B tier. Just a solid AoE option if you don't have any other AoE. If you do have other AoE options, I wouldn't really be picking Seeking Edge. Spoils of Battle, 1 energy, forge 10. Now this card compared to some of the other forge cards just has a larger number on it. Forge 10 is like decently big. So if you need some damage scaling for like the Act 1 boss or whatever, this card could be your card to solve that. Otherwise, if you don't need that kind of scaling, just don't pick it. This can go into B tier just because the value is like fine. Summon 4th, forge 8. Put Sovereign Blade into your hand from anywhere. Summon 4th is one of the best forge cards because one of the problem with Sovereign Blade is after you play it, it goes to your discard pile. Then you have to draw the Sovereign Blade again, so you cannot play Sovereign Blade again next turn. So Summon 4th solves that draw consistency problem, which is quite nice. So if you are forging, Summon 4th is like the card you want to be looking for. Another interaction with Summon 4th is if you exhaust your Sovereign Blade, you can put it back into your hand from the exhaust pile. So if in the meantime you make another Sovereign Blade in your hand, for example, your exhaust Sovereign Blade, then you forge with another forge card. Now you have a Sovereign Blade in your hand and Sovereign Blade in your exhaust pile. Then you summon 4th. You put the Sovereign Blade from your exhaust into your hand, then forge 8 on both Sovereign Blades. So that's a niche little interaction that works with Summon 4th. But the main payoff for Summon 4th is just you can draw the Sovereign Blade from anywhere. This is also one of the best forge cards, so I'll be putting it into 8 here. Now again, with forge card, you need to remember Sovereign Blade just deals damage. So if you do not need more damage, just don't pick the Sovereign Blades. Sword Sage, increase the cost of Sovereign Blade by 1. Sovereign Blade now hits an additional time for a 2-cost power. So on the turn you play Sword Sage, you cannot even afford to play Sovereign Blade since it's gonna be a 3-cost attack. Spending 2 energy on Sword Sage and it does nothing on the turn you play it, and it doesn't do much much if the Sovereign Blade has a low base number. And if your Sovereign Blade is already large, you don't even need this effect. It's probably better to just apply Vulnerable to the enemy. That increases the damage of Sovereign Blade by 1.5, and you don't need to pay the increased cost. Overall, this power is way too slow and way too expensive, very awkward. I would not really pick Sword Sage unless you have like Snecko Eye or something like that, which is something you can get in the game. They can maybe think about Sword Sage, or if you're desperate for damage, you just don't have anything else. But usually, I would not be very interested in Sword Sage. I'll be putting it in D tier. The Smith, 1 energy, 4 stars, Forge 30. This is a star payoff card in addition to a Forge card. This card is okay. The number is just very big, so if you can play the Smith, it's quite nice. But however, the caveat is it costs you 4 stars, and spending 4 stars can get you other options that's potentially stronger than the Smith. For example, Comet is 5 stars for like a completely insanely busted effect. However, the number is big enough that it cannot be that bad. It's just kind of mid. I'll be putting it in C tier. Of course, caveat, if you do have the star economy to support the Smith and you don't have much to do with the stars, this is like pretty good payoff. Wrath in War, 1 energy, deal 7 damage, Forge 5. As a early game damage card, this is just like barely good enough. It's like fine to help you against some Act 1 boss or elite. Falls off very quickly. Forge 5 just isn't a big number, and 7 damage is also a strike. So unfortunately, really not great. You probably never want to pick this card unless you are desperate to forge. It will be going to D tier. Part 4, the card generation package. These are the cards that either generate cards in combat or have some payoff for each card you generate in combat. First off, we have Arsenal. Whenever you play a colorless card, gain 1 strength. Now, usually colorless cards are generated in combat, but sometimes you also just put them into your deck as an actual card. And Sovereign Blade is also a colorless card, so every time you play Sovereign Blade, you will gain 1 strength. However, if you already have a big Sovereign Blade, the 1 strength is really not relevant. This card is just slow strength scaling, kind of comparable to something like a Rupture on the Ironclad, for example. If you're able to make a bunch of colorless cards, then this is like fine. Unfortunately, most of the times, the colorless card generation just isn't something you are looking to do. I'll be putting this in C tier. It's decent damage scaling if you're making a bunch of colorless cards. However, making a bunch of colorless cards just isn't something you want to be doing. Quasar, 0 energy, 2 stars. Choose 1 out of 3 random colorless cards, add it into your hand. Note that the colorless cards are not discounted, unlike Discovery. This card, unfortunately, just says 0 energy, 2 stars. Do nothing half of the time. There are way better ways to spend your stars than Quasar, so unfortunately, pretty much never picked. It will be going to D tier. Begone, deal 4 damage. Choose a card in your hand to transform into Minion Dive Bomb, which is 1 energy, 13 damage, exhaust. This attack is quite good. Begone is quite good value early game, 2 energy for 17 damage. And the fact that you can choose a card in your hand to transform into a card that exhausts will help you think your deck to exhaust down to some sort of combo that you have. So quite a good, solid early game damage card that has some utility late game. I will be putting it in A tier. Bundle of Joy, 2 energy to add 3 random colorless cards into your hand. And the colorless cards are not discounted, so you pay 2 energy to do nothing if you cannot afford to play the colorless cards. This card is very, very bad, unfortunately. It's a cool idea, but the rate on the card is just way too below par. You'll be going to D tier as well. Charge, choose 2 cards in your draw pile to transform into Minion Strikes. Minion Strike is 0 energy, do 7, draw a card, exhaust. So cantrips. This card is quite good. It helps you exhaust down your deck, and the cantrips they generate kind of pseudo draw, so charge doesn't really cost you a draw. This kind of thing is like fine to have a copy in most decks, since most decks probably want to get rid of your strikes and defense. There are a lot of enemies that put status cards into your deck as well, so you can transform the status cards into Minion Strikes. It can also hit some curses. For example, if you pick like the Greed Nia option, 333 gold for the Greed Curse, charge can also hit that. So very solid card that exhausts down your deck and kind of doesn't cost you a draw. This will be going to A tier, since the Regent is a character that's like pretty interested in exhausting down to a tight loop. Collision Course, 0 energy, deal 9 damage, add the Debris into your hand. Debris is a status that just says 1 energy, exhaust. It doesn't do anything else. As an early game damage card, this is kind of like 1 energy, 9 damage, so strike plus. Now, would you want to put the strike plus into your deck? No, most of the time. Now, adding a Debris into your hand can sometimes enemies have some synergy, but this card is just too difficult to pick early game, and if you have the card generation synergy, making one card also just isn't impactful enough. Overall, very, very mediocre damage option. I guess if you really need a damage card, you can pick it early. You'll be going into D tier. Crash Landing, 1 energy, deal 21 damage to all enemies, fill your hand with debris. The value on this card is quite insane, of course. 1 energy, 21 damage to all enemies. However, the downside is pretty brutal. Filling your hand with debris is pretty horrible for most fight that goes on for like longer than 2 turns. So early game, it's like okay, just as a 1 energy 21 AoE. I wouldn't put too much stock on the debris portion of the card. You can think of that as a downside instead of an upside most of the time. However, the number is big, so for a just like brute force early game damage card, it can be C tier. Guards, transform any number of cards in your hand into minion sacrifice, exhaust for 2 energy. And minion sacrifice is just 0 energy, block 9, exhaust. This card is completely ridiculous. This basically says exhaust your hand, block for 30, which is already an absurd effect. In addition, you don't even need to exhaust every card in your hand, you get to choose. So you can exhaust like every card in your hand besides one critical combo piece you need for your combo. Completely overpowered card. One of the best cards on the class. Straight up into S tier. Heirloom Hammer, 2 energy, deal 17 damage. Choose a colorless card in your hand, add a copy of that card into your hand. 2 energy for 17 damage is way too below rate just for an attack. And choosing a colorless card in your hand to duplicate it is not even a good effect most of the time. You need to have a colorless card in your hand first of all. Well, the best target to hit with Heirloom Hammer could be your Sovereign Blade. But is that really worth it for 2 energy, deal 17? I don't think so. So usually this card is really, really bad. There is a funny use case of you have a Flash of Steel, then you Heirloom Hammer the Flash of Steel, then you go infinite with double Flash of Steel. But if you are in that situation, you will see how to use Heirloom Hammer. In general, very bad card. Maybe going into D tier. The caveat, this card can actually do something in certain decks compared to some of these other D tier cards which are just bad. Manifest Authority, gain 7 block, add a random colorless card into your hand. This card is actually not too bad. It's card advantage sort of, and it also comes with 7 block, which could save you meaningful HP in early game. Just based on that fact alone, this could be just a B tier card. Just some block and some decent value. Of course, you would not be picking this card if you are already doing some tight loop and you don't want to add a random colorless card into your hand. Pillar of Creation. Whenever you create a card, gain 3 block. This is a solid block option. Notably, it works with anything that transforms. So for example, it works with Charge. So every time you play Charge, you get 6 block in addition to the Charge effect. This card is just a slow scaling defensive option, and if you want a bit more defense in your deck, you can pick it up. Otherwise, it's not super amazing. I'll put it into B tier just because the value this card generates is like fine. Spectrum Shift, 2 energy at the start of your turn, add a random colorless card into your hand. This is Magnetism from Slay Spire 1. The effect itself is good to have in play. Generating a random colorless card every turn is just good value. So if you can play this card, it's fine. However, the card costing 2 it just makes this card a bit slow, a bit hard to play in hallway fights or elites. So usually it's not something you're looking to do early game. If you're in the end game, you don't have enough scaling, you can pick this up as a boss solve. Overall, just slow scaling card. If you need it, then you need it. I would not pick Spectrum Shift to speculate on the whole card creation combo thing. You should just think about this card as a slow scaling card that could help you solve the bosses. Supermassive, 1 energy, deal 5 damage. Deal 3 additional damage for each card you created this combat. Now early game, this card is completely horrible. You're picking like a 1 energy, deal 5 damage, which is worse than a strike. Late game, this card is still not impressive. A lot of the good card generating cards don't generate that many cards. For example, Charge generates 2 cards every time you play it. So Supermassive scales up very slowly. Now you might be tempted to say, again, with like something like Crash Landing, you make a bunch of debris, then Supermassive gets big quickly. You run to the situation where if you draw a Supermassive before Crash Landing, this card is worse than Strike. Is that something you want to be doing when you are already very draw dependent as a character? Not really. So Supermassive is just not worth it as a card. If you really need a scaling damage, I can maybe see it, but you have access to so much other ways to do scaling damage. For example, Forge. Any of the Forge stuff is already better than Supermassive. So overall, not very impressed with this card. Part 5, the essential support cards. These are the cards that don't quite fit into any of the above sections, but perform a critical role the Regent needs. And first off, we have a banger, Big Bang. 0 energy skill. Draw a card, gain energy, gain star, forge 5, exhaust. This card kind of just does everything that Regent needs. It's kind of like the adrenaline of Regent. Very straightforward, very powerful effect. Be going to S tier. Bombardment, deal 18 damage at the start of your turn. Play from the exhaust pile. Exhaust. What this says is deal 18 damage for 3 energy, then every other turn after this, deal 18 damage for free. Quite a powerful damage scaling option in longer fights. Dealing 18 damage every turn is very, very good. Perhaps a bit slow in faster fights, but the value this card generates is quite impressive. You're going to A tier. Celestial Might. Deal 6 damage 3 times for 2 energy. This is just a big attack card. It's kind of like Carnage on the Ironclad in Slay the Spire 1. Just 2 energy, do 20 damage. But the numbers is a bit lower. There are multiple ways to make this better. For example, if you have any strength, if you can enchant the card with any +2 damage enchantment, for example. There's also a relic that says your upgraded attacks do more damage. So Celestial Might can play with potions or relics or enchantments. Overall, if you need early game damage, you can pick it just like a front row damage card. And later in the game, you don't really want to play this card. You're going to C tier. Cosmic Indifference. Gain 6 block. Put a card from your discard pile on top of your draw pile. Now, gaining 6 block from 1 energy is slightly better than a defense, so it's not the best thing ever, but this card could already save you some chip damage in early game. And the effect it has is very good. Regent has draw order problem, and this card kind of fixes draw order problems. So a solid defensive card that has great utility throughout the game. I put it in A tier. Crush Under. 1 energy, do 7 AoE, and all enemies lose 1 strength this turn. This is kind of like a offensive card and defensive card stapled onto a common that doesn't have a star cost. All enemy lose 1 strength is not like the best thing ever, but it does save you some HP. And doing 7 damage to all enemies also isn't a great number. However, both effects on the same card just makes this card have decent value. And in the late game, some enemies have artifacts. This card can also strip artifact. Overall, just like okay, be going to C tier. Foregone Conclusion. 1 energy. Next turn, put 2 cards from your draw pile into your hand. You get to choose what these cards are. Also, this does not exhaust, so you get to play this multiple times. If you can put Foregone Conclusion on top, for example, with Cosmic Indifference, you can just do that again. Very, very powerful tutor effect. Exactly what the Regent needs. However, it's a bit slow. It's next turn, and it costs you 1 energy, so it could be kind of awkward in faster fights. In a small deck that you're already consistent enough, you also don't want this card. But since the effect is so powerful, you're going to top of A tier. Glimmer. 1 energy, draw 3 cards. Put a card from your hand on top of your draw pile. This is generally a pretty good effect to have. If you're spending 1 energy to draw 3 cards, usually you cannot spend all your rest of your energy to play every card in your hand. So putting a card from your hand on top of your draw pile is not necessarily a negative thing. It can help you set up the next turn. A pretty decent card draw option. And Regent really loves this kind of card draw effect, so I will be putting it in A tier. Just be careful to not overpick this kind of card draw in early game if you don't have enough energy to play them. And card draw is worse early game because you're drawing to strikes and defend. You would want to draw into better cards, but overall quite good. Glitter Stream. Gain 11 block. Next turn, gain 4 block for 2 energy. Kind of like 2 energy, block 15, but the block is split over 2 turns. Sometimes maybe the enemy doesn't attack you, then the 4 block is wasted. If you're really desperate for block, you can pick this early to make a bit of block, but otherwise not super great. This will go into C tier. Heavenly Drill. X cost. Deal 8 damage X times. Double X if it's 4 or more. Now, if you just ignore the second line of text, just say deal 8 damage X times, that's already a decent card all in itself. A very dense damage card. And of course, if you get to double the X, it's like completely ridiculous. You pay X cost, you one-shot an enemy. So decent early game card, and if you can make the double work, it's very, very good. And even if you just make the double work in one fight, maybe with like an energy potion or something, it's already quite a good thing to do. I'll be putting it in A tier. Now remember, if you do not need this kind of front row damage, just don't pick this card, even if you have the energy to spend. If your deck is already doing something better than playing Heavenly Drill, then don't pick Heavenly Drill. Hegemony. 2 energy, deal 15 damage. Next turn, gain 2 energy. 2 energy for 15 damage is just a bit below rate, and this card is also way too draw order dependent. It depends on you drawing good cards next turn to spend the energy. Now the Regent is already a very draw order dependent character, as I have mentioned, and for such a draw order dependent card, energy would like to do something way stronger than whatever hegemony does. For that reason, I will be putting this in D tier. I am invincible. 1 energy block 9. At the end of your turn, if this is on top of your draw pile, play it. Now 1 energy block 9 is an average rate for a block card. However, the Regent has big problems blocking, so gaining 9 block is a little bit more valuable on the Regent compared to something like the Silent. And we have seen plenty of ways to put a card on top of your draw pile, like Glimmer, like Cosmic Indifference. So this card could reasonably be played for free. Just a decent value card for a solid B tier card. Know thy place. 0 energy, apply weak, apply vulnerable, exhaust. Weak and vulnerable keywords are very strong, and the fact that this card costs 0 just makes it even better. One of the best commons in the class. This will be going to A tier. Next up, we have Nightly Kick and Nightly Punch. Both of these attacks are kind of similar. They do something whenever you draw them. Nightly Kick, 4 energy, deal 24. Whenever you draw this card, reduce the cost by 1. So 3 energy, 24 as a baseline. Nightly Punch, 1 energy, deal 8. Whenever you draw this card, increases damage by 3. So 1 energy, 11. Now as a baseline, both cards are quite poor. 3 energy, 24 or 1 energy, 11 just are below rate. However, the Regent could have some ways to put these cards back on top to draw them again on the same turn. So sometimes Nightly Kick could become 2 energy, 24. Nightly Punch could be 1 energy, 14. Now suddenly these cards look pretty okay. And as the fight goes on, they get decosted or they get stronger. Now there is a massive difference between these cards. Nightly Kick discounts to 0 cost. That means if you can loop Nightly Kick over and over, you are able to generate infinite damage. And usually that's easier to do than looping Nightly Punch over and over and try to make this card as big as possible. So as an early game card, both cards are mediocre, but they do have the potential to grow, so they are not the worst thing ever. I'll be putting Nightly Punch in C tier, and I will be putting Nightly Kick in B tier, since Nightly Kick has the potential to become 0 cost, and 0 cost cards in Slay the Spire just have a lot of potential to be broken. Lunar Blast, 0 cost attack, deal 4 damage for each skill already played this turn. So as a baseline, maybe you play 2 skills and this card says 0 damage to 8, which is fine. And if you can play a lot of skills in 1 turn, then this card gets pretty big pretty quickly. So as an early game card, an average rate card, and as a late game card, if you are able to spam a lot of skills, this card gets pretty big. I'll put it into B tier. The caveat for this card, if your deck is already able to spam a lot of skills, maybe you can do something stronger than play Lunar Blast. So you don't necessarily want to pick this up even if this has the potential to become very big. Make it so. Deal 6 damage. Every 3 skill you play in a turn, put this card into your hand. Now 0 damage for 6 is an average rate. It's like a fine early game card. And usually you are able to play 3 skills in a single turn. You can think about Make It So like a relic. Something like a kunai, it says play 3 attacks, gain a dexterity. This card says play 3 skills, get 6 damage. And put it into your hand is from everywhere. It can also be from your draw pile. So a pretty decent damage card. Be going to B tier. Monarch's Gaze. Whenever you attack an enemy, it loses 1 strength this turn for 3 energy. Way too expensive for what it does. You have to spend 3 energy to deploy this power, so you're already getting hit in the face when you do that. Then you need to play attacks on the enemy. If you don't play many attacks, this doesn't do anything. There are way better things to spend 3 energy on than Monarch's Gaze, unfortunately. So if you're desperate for some kind of defensive scaling, Monarch's Gaze is not the worst. Otherwise, it's quite slow for what it does. I'll be putting this in C tier because the effect itself is not so bad. There are a lot of enemies that multi-hit you. Monologue, 0 energy. Whenever you play a card this turn, gain 1 strength this turn. This card is just way too slow. Sometimes you play a monologue and maybe you gain like 2 strength for the turn, which is quite bad for a draw. And if you can make monologue pop off, you probably already don't need it. Unfortunately, not a very good card, so we'll be going to D tier. Orbit, 2 cost power. Every 4 energy you spend, gain energy. This effectively says gain 1 energy every turn, but you can kind of time when the orbit procs. So very straightforward effect, very powerful effect. Energy is at a premium in this game because you don't have energy relics. I'll be putting this in A tier. Pale Blue Dot, 1 cost power. If you play 5 or more cards in a turn, draw 1 card at the start of your next turn. This power has a very powerful upgrade. It becomes draw 2 cards at the start of your next turn. So if you're able to proc it consistently, is completely insane. Drawing 2 cards per turn is just such a powerful effect. However, early game you cannot really proc this, so a little bit difficult to pick early. But the effect is very good later. I'll be putting in this in B tier. But if you're able to block pale blue dot, you should always be picking this card. It's just the fact that it's so difficult to proc it early. It doesn't go above B, but under the correct situations, it's an S tier card. Pattern, 1 energy, gain 8 block, gain 2 vigor. Vigor says for the next attack you play, it deals 2 additional damage. If it's a multi-hit, then every hit of the multi-hit deals 2 additional damage, and it persists between turn. Effectively, you can think about this card as gain 8 block, deal 2 damage. And if you have a multi-hit attack, then great. Now, gaining 8 block on the Regent is not the worst thing ever. However, 2 vigor just doesn't really do much ever. So unfortunately, this card is still a little bit below par. Be going into C tier. Photon cut. 1 energy, do 10. Draw a card. Put a card from your hand on top of your draw pile. You might think this card is a bit like Pommel Strike, and it upgrades to draw 2 cards even. However, drawing 1 card and putting a card from your hand on top of your draw pile is not truly draw positive. So there's no any sort of like a loop you can enable with Photon Cut. However, there are certain cards in this class that want to be put on top of your draw pile. For example, Knightly Kick, Knightly Punch, so it has some potential with that in that regard. Unfortunately, 1 energy 10 just on its own is just a little below par, and the effect could be good if you have the support for it, but you're not guaranteed to have any use for that effect. Overall, kind of a mediocre attack that could pop off in certain situations if you're going to C tier. Prophesize. 2 energy, draw 6. Upgrade to 2 energy, draw 9. Unfortunately, completely unplayable early game. 2 energy, draw 6, and have no energy to do anything else. However, this card has an extremely high potential. If you're able to generate any energy, this card is completely insane. It draws you a huge amount of cards. So in that regard, I'll be putting it in C tier. It's a very polarizing card. It's either completely unplayable or the best card in your deck. And if you are in the situations you want to have this card, you will know it. As an early game pick, maybe don't speculate on it. Royalties. 1 energy power at the end of combat, gain 30 gold. This is a very funny effect. Gaining 30 gold is very good, since that could buy you relics, that could buy you card removes, that could buy you potions. For 1 energy, the cost is also not super steep. So if you're able to not die and have royalties, you should pretty much always pick it. The only consideration is it's a rare card, so it's gonna be competing with other rare cards. You might want to have the other rare cards instead, but in a vacuum, very good. This will be in S tier. Of course, if you're picking it up at the end of Act 2, it's significantly worse, since you have a shorter amount of time to generate the gold. Terraforming. 1 energy, gain 6 vigor. Upgrades to 8 vigor. Now, 1 energy, gain 6 vigor, you can read it as 1 energy, do 6 damage, which is a strike. Do you want to add a strike into your deck? Not really. The whole multi-hit effect is way too draw rate dependent, and if you can line up combos consistently, you want to be doing something way better than gaining 6 vigor. Pretty poor card. Tyranny. 1 energy power. At the start of your turn, draw a card and exhaust a card from your hand. This card is also something that the Regent very much appreciates. Drawing a card every turn is a good effect already. In addition, you're able to exhaust any cards that you do not want. You can exhaust your strikes, your defense, and there are a lot of enemies that put statuses into your deck. There are even enemies that put statuses into your hand. So the exhaust a card from your hand per turn is just pure upside. Very strong card. Maybe going to S tier. And finally, we have Void Form. 3 energy power, end your turn. The first 2 cards you play each turn are free to play. Upgrades to first 3 cards. The end your turn part isn't super relevant since it's 3 cost. Usually the turn you play Void Form, you can't do anything else anyways. So what this power reads is 3 energy, win the fight. If you spend 3 energy on Void Form, you win the fight, pretty much. The free to play part also includes stars. You can play any of the expensive star cost cards for free. There's not much else to say. This is pretty much the best card on the class. It goes straight into S tier. That's the complete Regent character breakdown. Let me recap the core strategy. First, prioritize card draw and deck manipulation. The Regent is very draw order dependent to line up the star generation and payoff cards. Second, every card must either solve an immediate problem them generate stars or have a powerful way to spend stars. Let me know in the comments which card evaluations you agree or disagree with, and subscribe for more Slay the Spire 2 strategy content. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.